Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. So incredibly grateful to be here. Thank you. Thank you. I am here to talk about my own personal journey from a life of disconnection, separation, trauma, shame, and addiction to a life filled with passion, openness, and quite frankly, filled with love. And so I want to go way back and start from the very beginning of my story because I think it informs my entire life and my whole point of view around addiction, which might be a little different than some other models or some other ways of viewing both addiction and recovery. So I was born in Indiana to a family that looked really normal on the outside. And I remember thinking, what I'm experiencing when I'm in my home is very different than the way we kind of show ourselves outside of our home. I learned very quickly that what people were saying, what people were doing, and the energy I felt were three totally different and incongruent things. I also remember being a very happy child, that was my instinct, my way of living, being completely mesmerized and in awe of the world and of life, filled with love, filled with joy, and feeling very, very deeply connected to my true nature. Of course, I didn't say that when I was a little kid, I feel really deeply connected to my true nature, but I was a happy child, very happy child. And I remember lying in the sun and just feeling the sun and looking up at the stars and just thinking, wow, this is so magical. And then I also remember hearing some of the tall people in my life saying some things that really hurt my soul at a very deep level. My dad and his brothers saying things about women that literally made my body tighten. People talking about people of different races in a way that made me actually cry as a little kid. Recognizing at a very early age that I was different than a lot of the other little boys and that I was in some way told that I needed to act a certain way in order to be acceptable. Toughen up. And I was a sensitive little boy. As a matter of fact, my mom loves to tell the story that by the time I was 4, she realized I was probably going to be gay. And I often show her my 3-year-old picture and say, "What took you so long?" Because I was an effervescent little child at a time and a place when a little 3 and 4 and 5-year-old effervescent boy wasn't necessarily going to be loved and accepted for that in the general world or in my school, in the playground, with my friends, in the neighborhood. I received messages that it's not okay to be me at a very, very early age. I also remember being in the energy or the frequency of people around me that didn't feel safe. And at a very young age, 7 years old, I had a profound experience of my heart closing. And I actually remember it like it was yesterday. I was at my dining room table with my mom and my 2 sisters. And at 7, this experience of my heart closing was profound. It was a physical sensation of closing off. And I remember it felt like someone or something outside of me was coming in to protect me. And it was at that moment, at age 7, that I decided a few really key things about myself. 1, I'm not lovable. 2, I'm not smart enough. And 3, I'm not good enough. And not only was that a thought, but that was a felt sense and experience, an energetic closing down that lasted for the next 7 years. So for those 7 years, I walked around afraid. I walked around feeling like the world wasn't safe. I walked around looking at my parents and their loveless marriage and felt really confused. I remember hearing my grandfather, a man that I loved, use racial slurs that hurt my heart, and it was confusing for me because I loved him and he was saying these things that felt horrific to me. And so I definitely protected myself. Of course, I've come to recognize that closing off, that shutting down was actually a brilliant strategy as well as what we might call a coping mechanism. And why do I call it a brilliant strategy? Because it literally saved my life. That wall protected me. But unfortunately, it also protected me from the love and connection that I deeply desired. So by the time I was 13 or 14, I discovered something to bring myself relief, and that was weed and alcohol. Now, I wasn't walking around thinking, oh, I have these walls up and I feel very closed off and I have these deep core false beliefs and a lot of unresolved trauma, spiritual disconnection, and toxic shame, which we'll talk about in a moment. And I really need something to bring relief. That wasn't the experience. What the experience was, someone gave me weed and alcohol, and oh my gosh, I'm in awe again. I'm at peace again. The world didn't seem as harsh. It mattered less that people were saying things that were really hurting my soul. I found a way to numb out. I found a way to manage these core false beliefs of unworthiness, of not good enoughness, of unlovability. So alcohol and weed saved my life, and it worked really well for another 7 years. I have these 7-year cycles. It's very interesting. Age 7, I closed my heart. Age 14, I discovered drugs and alcohol. And right before I turned 21, I got sober. I want to talk about the last year of my drinking and using. I discovered ecstasy. And it was in the very early days of ecstasy, and I was in a nightclub. It actually literally was the birthplace. It was still legal. You could buy it at the bar, put it on your credit card. $20. Add that to my credit card. That's a whole other story we could talk about. Me and credit cards. Maybe we will talk about that a little bit. Let's just say this. I felt so empty and bankrupt on the inside that I was looking for anything to feel whole again. It was like I had my umbilical cord in my hand and I was looking for someone or something to plug into. And that included shopping and sex and looking good and drugs and alcohol. All of that was to try to manage this sense of emptiness and brokenness within. And so that last year of my drinking and using became this real low-level search for love and connection. And when I used ecstasy, boy, did I love you. And boy, did you love me. That was the drug that really helped me to be in my heart again. And again, I'm actually really grateful for it. Once again, it saved my life. But darn it, once again, it also quit working that way. And it didn't take long. The first time I did it, it was the most magical night of my life, and it seemed to last for about 24 hours, which was also incredible. And from that moment on, for the next year, I tried to recapture that experience. And so if it didn't work, which it didn't work on the second time I tried it, which was the next night, of course, I thought, well, let me take 2. Well, let me try 3. Well, let me try 4. And so I ended up overdosing, going into convulsions in the middle of the night one time, and absolutely, I wrote my goodbye letter because I knew I was dying. And one would think that I would tell you now that the next day I got sober, but that isn't the truth. What happened next is I continued drinking and using, even though I came so close to death, which is so interesting to me because a lot of times we hear people say you have to lose everything in order to get sober. Well, I had almost died. I had written my goodbye letter at 3 a.m. or 5 a.m. or whatever it was on my friend's bedroom floor. Something that's striking about that moment, and I've never even talked about this, but something that was striking about that moment for me was I was convulsing on the floor, and I didn't even feel like I was worthy to tell them I was dying. And so there I was on my deathbed, literally writing my goodbye letter, and not even feeling like it was okay for me to ask for help. So that sense of emptiness and disconnection was so profound. And I think it was another 4 or 5 months before I got sober. The way I got sober is a friend of mine, this is a true story. I'll tell the true story. Okay, so a friend of mine had gotten sober, and I know now his sobriety date is October 21st, and it was Halloween, and I ran into him. He was 10 days sober. And I remember thinking, what? How have you not used drugs for 10 days? That seemed unfathomable to me. I also was kind of attracted to him, so let me just Put that in there. And he invited me, he said, I go to this place and we talk about I quit drinking and using, and we talk about life and we support each other. And maybe you want to come with me sometime. October 31st, 1985. And I thought he was asking me out on a date. He wasn't. October 31st, 1985, I was invited into recovery, but I had 6 more months of using. And on June 7th of 1986, exactly 1 year from the day, and I know this to be true, exactly 1 year from the day I first used ecstasy, I was at that same nightclub, and I just couldn't take ecstasy. I couldn't do it. I had 3 beers. I remember sitting downstairs at this bar and feeling, God, is this all there is? Is this my life? Is this what I'm destined to be? Just feeling empty and alone and afraid? And there was that friend. He was there. He was 6 months sober. And I beelined to him. See, I hadn't even had a conscious memory of him inviting me into recovery 6 months earlier. I ran to him and I said, are you still going to that place that's helping you, and can I go with you? And so I went to my first meeting. And I walked into the room, and one of the first things that was so striking, I felt like there were 10,000 people in the room. There were probably 100. Back in the day, smoking, I walked into this big smoke-filled room, and I'm like, what is happening? But something that was really striking to me, I looked around the room, and I saw some of the people who had disappeared from my circle of friends. That's where you went. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that I needed something different. And it was there that I discovered that I could actually receive the love of the people there. Now, I would also love to tell you that at that moment, I opened my heart and I started receiving love again, and everything was wonderful. And on some level, that's true. That is true, because that was the day I got sober, June 8th, 1986. But I also was terrified to address those deep places within me that felt so empty. I was unwilling or unable or afraid to address the traumatic events of my life that actually led to relief in the bottle and the drug. And so I just became really happy being in recovery. And I'm just gonna fess up here. I became the person that knew everything. I knew exactly how to get sober. I knew exactly how everyone needed to get sober. And I was going to tell you exactly what page number you needed to read if you were having any feeling other than joy. And I was here to help you. You might want to read page such and such. It might help you with your problem. And what I know about that, in retrospect, is that I was terrified still. And I'd taken away the brilliant strategy of drugs and alcohol, and I was left with a lot of things that felt unresolved. And the best I could do at that moment was grab onto recovery and be the most enthusiastic cheerleader for recovery that anyone's ever seen and have the answers for all of you, right? And there was, by the way, only one way to do it, and it's the right way, and it's the way I did it. And I'm going to tell you that it's the right way. So let's just say I was a little rigid. 18 months sober, I found myself suicidal. And there was a woman that I kind of knew named Mary Helen who was 19 years sober. Couldn't even imagine what that was. She was like this beacon of light to me. As a matter of fact, she was the most enlightened person I had ever met. And through her presence, through her love, through her guidance, really through her beingness, she demonstrated a different possibility for me. And so there I was, suicidal, sober 18 months, thinking, how could this possibly be happening? Because I'm supposed to be happy, joyous, and free, as some of us know. We've all heard this. Some of us have heard this. If you know. But I was supposed to be happy, joyous, and free. But what was I? I was suicidal. How can this be? And so she introduced me to 2 fundamental things that have changed the course of my life. 1, there's a place within you that is whole and perfect. You are not broken. You are spiritually whole. You came into this world as a whole and perfect being, and life happened. And you decided a lot of things about yourself and the world that are core false beliefs, lies. And those lies have a frequency, and you're creating reality based on that frequency. Whoa, what is all that? She just kept saying, darling, you're so precious. And I just kept saying, no, I'm not. I'm a bad human. I've done all these things. I've hurt a lot of people. I've stolen. One night, we just walked into someone's house and stole a wallet off the table in the middle of a drug-induced. We thought there was an after party there. We walk in, 3 a.m. Oh, there's a wallet on the table. We took it. We hear someone saying, who's out there? Run out. I did a lot of stuff. And she introduced me to the idea that wasn't because I was a bad person, but because I was a whole and perfect spiritual being who started believing I was a broken and bad person. And because of that, I acted that way in the world. And it doesn't mean I'm not accountable for that behavior and I don't need to go back and mend that. But what it does mean is that doesn't mean I'm a fundamentally flawed human. And that moment of awareness, even hearing her words and seeing her demonstrate that changed everything for me. And then she introduced me to the idea that recovery is about returning to that, not about moving somewhere and becoming good. She would say life is not about becoming good, but about becoming real. The other thing she introduced me to was the possibility that we could actually heal the underlying root causes, and that there is a place within each of us that has the courage to face that instead of run from it. I'd been running from all these feelings for so long. I'd been running from the sexual trauma of my past. I'd been running from the fear that I had experienced. I'd been running from what it was actually like to be gay in the 1960s in Indiana, not just like, oh yeah, it was hard. Yeah, it was like, yeah, I decided that I was fundamentally wrong because of that. And so that set me out on a course of healing. I started working in the addiction treatment field in 2008. And there were some very striking things to me. People were coming back to treatment multiple times. And in my friend group, I saw people struggling and running from this pain, this psychic pain within them. And I heard people saying things like, I'm just an alcoholic. Or they would really say, I'm just an effed up alcoholic. I don't know how to live. I don't know how to do life. I'm broken. And I remember hearing a friend, and I don't want this to be judgmental because it was a pivotal moment for me. He was 26 years sober. He was standing up in front of a room talking about relationships. And he literally said, because I'm an alcoholic, I don't know how to have relationships. And I have to accept that I'm just effed up and learn how to live with that. I literally said, that can't be my reality. It can't be my reality. It can't be our collective reality. There has to be something more than the belief that I have a lifelong chronic disease that wants to kill me, and that the only thing I can do is manage that one day at a time. There has to be a different possibility. And that possibility, what if we're not fundamentally different than other people? What if all human beings came into this world as a whole and perfect spiritual being, and we have in some way separated from that? And that's actually the existential crisis of humanity. We're not unique because we've had addiction. Addiction just became our strategy. I picked up drugs and alcohol and became addicted to it. Someone else might have done that with workaholism or with power or with look-goodism, or with sex, or with shopping, or drama, right? People are addicted to CNN and Fox News now. Why? Maybe they're managing unresolved trauma. So rather than viewing addiction as something that is fundamental and organic and a disease, which it might be, in addition to that, what if it's also a brilliant strategy for survival? And what if we can actually heal the underlying root causes, which I've already said to me are unresolved trauma, spiritual disconnection, and toxic shame? And what if the journey of recovery is really about returning what needs to be unlearned? How do I create inner safety so that I can start to unlearn these ideas and these beliefs? Can I turn toward what's trapped in the unconscious that's creating what I call reality? Can I understand that because I'm walking around with the frequency of brokenness, I see it everywhere? And that's not a bad thing. That's wonderful news. That means I can do something about it. No, we're not fundamentally broken because we have an addiction. We're all whole and perfect spiritual beings. And in the end, that's the human experience. We have so much more in common with other people in our world than just being an addict or an alcoholic. And that means we're different. And so what I want to close with is a possibility. And that possibility is that each of us, whether we have an addiction, whether we have a brilliant strategy that might have served us really well, but no longer is, what I want to offer is that you are a person who is worthy of returning to your true nature, that place of wholeness. You can call off the search and rest in a greater reality that truth is right here, one breath away. It's who and what you are. You are not broken. You are whole and perfect. Your addiction was managing the disconnection and the shame. And that at this moment, you can pause and reconnect with that true nature. And so, yeah, we've heard recovery is a process, and that might be true, but it also can be an instantaneous recognition of a greater reality. And in that instantaneous recognition, the entire trajectory can change, because when I realized that there was a place within me that is unharmed and unharmable, I could then turn and heal the trauma, because I knew it wasn't who I was. I knew I wasn't what my family had done, and I also knew that I wasn't all the ways that I'd harmed the world. Yes, I needed to clean that up, but it's not who I was. It's not who I am. Who I am is an essential being filled with infinite possibilities. And that's what I want for every human, to recognize that we do have this ability to unlearn all the ways that we have separated from that and return to that place of wholeness. I'm so grateful to have shared a bit of my story with you, and I hope that in some way it can serve as a possibility for your life, a possibility for your relationships, a possibility for the way you view yourself in the world, and quite frankly, a different possibility for our world. So incredibly grateful. Peace and blessings, everyone.